Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. If you've been listening to all of our recent episodes, you might remember from our 100th celebratory episode that we mentioned that we signed a sponsor. And something that was really important for us when finding a sponsor was making sure that it was a company that really aligned with the things that we believe in, and also something that we've used and something that we feel good about. So this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Italki.
Italki is a fast, effective, and personalized way to become fluent in any language. The best way to learn a language is to simply start speaking, and this is what makes Italki great. It is a platform that connects you with native-speaking teachers all over the world. You can log on, find a teacher in your price range, and start focusing on the things you actually want to learn.
As a fan of the World Wanderers, when you sign up for your first lesson, you'll get your second lesson free. All you have to do is visit www.theworldwanderers.com/italki. And italki is the letter I, talk, T-A-L-K, and then the letter I again. Get started today.
All right. On this episode of the podcast, we are talking about Atlanta.
Yeah.
ATL. Hotlanta. The Big Biscuit.
That's not a thing.
Okay, not yet.
The Flying Biscuit is a restaurant, but anyway, on this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about Atlanta and all the reasons why we love Atlanta, as well as getting a couple of our friends on the episode to talk about why they love living in Atlanta as well. And the reason for doing this episode is Atlanta doesn't seem to be on a lot of people's radar. It definitely was not on ours. It's not a hugely touristic town. It doesn't have the same draw that a lot of other cities like New York or Austin or San Francisco, LA, New Orleans have. And it has a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of beautiful scenery, and there's a ton of things that we really loved about being down in Atlanta. And so just to start, what were your expectations when you found out I have a job in Atlanta and I'm going to be living down there for 10 months?
I really didn't know much about the city, so I kind of pictured in my head like living in some apartment building near my work, and it would like all be apartment buildings and kind of concrete. So what I didn't really
jungle where dreams are made of.
So what I didn't really expect was just how like lush and green the city was.
Yeah.
And also really how many distinct areas to the city there are. Like there's downtown, there's midtown, there's Buckhead. There's a lot of different kind of really developed areas that are all kind of separated from each other.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that as well. Coming from, living in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, I was a bit worried that I was going to hate it and that it was going to be terrible. And we kind of talked about beforehand, because I was just visiting for the time, that, if I was hating it, it was okay for me to go somewhere else. And it shocked me how much I fell in love with Atlanta. I just never expected it. And one of the things that I loved most was how green the city is. And we lived off of Peachtree Road, which is a major road in the city. And, just going like 500 feet off the road, we're in a beautiful sort of condo complex backing onto a creek. You can walk down by the creek and it's just, you hear the sounds of nature, the occasional siren, but mostly sounds of nature. And it just constantly surprised me as I explored the city how much green space there was. I could drive for like 20 minutes and be in the forest. And again, I would hear nothing but the occasional plane go overhead, which is not uncommon in a lot of different forested areas. But just really cool how much greenery there is in a city of 6.4 million people. Yeah,
there's parks everywhere, trees all over the place. And I think a lot of people have this image of Atlanta and really the South in general that's not really accurate to reality. So Atlanta is this place where there's beautiful parks, really lush vegetation all over the city. There's amazing places to eat, lots of health food all over the place, a really active culture. It's not this like heading to Walmart, eating fried chicken, southern thing that kind of gets portrayed sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting since being back in Canada. Lots of people have asked me like, oh, what's Atlanta like? Like, is it just super gangster and like a lot of fried chicken? And I was like, well, it's like just this terrible stereotype. And I mean, there's Waffle House, there's Chick-fil-A, there's fried chicken, there's a Walmart culture, but that's not the entirety of the city. And so we have a couple friends who, like I mentioned before, who are going to talk about why they love living in Atlanta, the things that they enjoy doing most, and what they would recommend for you as a tourist to do if you were going to come to Atlanta.
Yeah, so we'll jump into the first one.
All right, I've got Katie Roll here with me. Katie, how long have you lived in Atlanta for?
Almost 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've lived here or been down here for almost 9 months now, and I really like the city. Mm-hmm. And so something Ryan and I are curious about is, what's your favorite thing to do in Atlanta?
I would say all of like the surrounding nature that is in such close proximity to the city. I found that out within the first month of being here, and I was so delighted by it. Like, everything's so close. You can be in the city, but you can, go to the river, or if you do want to trek a bit further, like an hour or so out, you can go kind of hike in the foothills of the mountains, So that was really surprising. I didn't expect that from such a big, major U.S. city. And that would be my number one favorite thing to do. I have dogs, take my dogs out, or go out with my husband and go hiking. And there's lots of miles that you can do, and they're all really, really close. And they're good trails, too. It's not, like, sketchy. You always feel safe.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that's been like one of my favorite things about Atlanta, and the thing I found most surprising about being down here too.
Yeah, it is.
And then in terms of restaurants, what's your favorite restaurant in the city?
I can't do that. I can't pick
You
one.
can only pick one. No, you can pick a couple if you want.
That's just awful. Well, I like that there's a lot of international influence since it's such a transient city. There's just a little bit of everything. There's the Ethiopian, there's the Thai and the Asian influences. There's lots of pockets that have a lot of Latin influence, and I love that, of course. So just anything that's kind of out of the ordinary, I love those. And then being a vegan and then following a gluten-free diet, I love Dulce Vegan in Kirkwood. They're amazing. They're almost like family at this point. They know us. They recognize us. They like, oh, we've got gluten-free this in. It's very allergy-friendly, so you don't have to be vegan or gluten-free. You could just have a peanut allergy, and they would be like, well, we're a peanut-free facility, so they're very accommodating. So I like them, and I like, let's see if I had to pick a second one. Probably Cafe Sunflower.
Cool.
2 locations for that, so whether you're north or more central, you can kind of get a really, really beautiful, nicely prepared meal. Yeah, if you want like a dinner out and want to feel really special.
Yeah, Cafe Sunflower is delicious. That's been one of my favorite places that I've eaten at too here.
So good.
Yeah. And what is been I know you said your favorite thing to do is be outside.
Right.
Any other favorite things about Atlanta? Like things that you really like about the city?
Yeah, I think this, funny enough, ties back to the food, and why I like all the different types of food here is that there's such an international influence in this city, more than any other U.S. city that I've been in or worked in or stayed in. There's just a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. I have friends from all over. I have Lebanese friends here. I have a Moroccan friend here. I have loads of friends from South America here.
Yeah.
And I kind of joke that I think you're the only, like, non-international friend. I'm like, oh, she's Canadian. Never mind. You are international. It just feels a little more familiar territory.
Yeah.
I'm so used to, like, English being the second language with all of my friends.
Totally.
So I'm used to that.
Yeah.
And I like that because I feel like, yes, I live in a U.S. city, but I'm getting exposed to lots of different cultures and lots of different ways of life. And even with people that I work with and teach, too. Like, they crossed my path. I had a German client, and that was so cool to talk to her and, like, talk about her country and stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've noticed that as well, and it's neat because, I mean, the other big city I lived in was Calgary in Alberta, and it's not nearly as eclectic and not as international as Atlanta, which is, it's something that I love about being here, too. And then if somebody was going to come down to Atlanta, what is something that you would recommend that they do?
I honestly don't know what I would say, because I know what I like to do, but I feel that I'm not typical in certain ways. So I would be like, yeah, eat vegan food and go hiking. And most people would be like, that's not a city lifestyle. I would say one of the things that I've done with like family and friends that have come down is take them into the downtown area, even if just to drive around, because there's a lot of iconic stuff down there. There's Centennial Olympic Park. If you care for the aquarium sort of thing, there's that. And then there's, the big news station and all of that. So there's stuff that people are like, oh, that's where that comes from. If they've never been there, if they're not familiar with like the Southeast and the history here, there's the MLK Memorial, there's all this. And it's really cool that it's within such a small little pocket. You get a lot of history. I will throw this out there now that I'm thinking of it. Oakland Cemetery is really neat for history if you like that sort of stuff. If you're like not weirded out by cemeteries, it's super cool. There's a lot of famous people buried there, and it's in a most eloquent and very like southern way. Beautiful tombstones and stuff.
Cool. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Great views of the city.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So one thing I really liked about Katie's answer, and that kind of reminded me of something I really liked about Atlanta, was just how multicultural the city is. Way more than anywhere I've ever lived before. You can just find kind of like little communities of like basically any culture. I remember we took a trip out to a place called Plaza Fiesta in Atlanta one time, which is like a Mexican mall. And
it's like a Latin American mall. It's not even just Mexican.
Yeah, I think it's like mostly Mexican, but yeah, Latin American and everything. It's like everyone there is Mexican, you typically.
Yeah, Latino, I would say.
And you go up to the places to order your food, and you could like do it in Spanish. The menus are in Spanish. It's just like you walked into Latin America.
Yeah. Yeah, we got some plantain chips, just like we used to do when we were in South America. It was really, really cool experience. It's kind of like you haven't left the U.S., you haven't left Atlanta, but you kind of have in a way, because all of a sudden you just find a ton of Latino people. It's like everyone's speaking Spanish. It looks exactly like Latin America in there. It's just like a traditional Latino mall.
Yeah. And then on another episode, we talked about food, and how we had this experience going to a place called the Buford Highway Farmers Market, which is just an amazing grocery store with like basically every single type of ethnic food imaginable. And the reason why a place like that works is because there are people from like all over the world who are in this city, and they want to come find stuff from wherever they're from. So you can find Brazilian food and Argentinian food and Korean food and Indian food and Cambodian food, Vietnamese food.
Yeah, I mean, the list just continues on and on. It's like basically any major destination in the world, you can find food from there.
Yeah, and then obviously in Atlanta as well, there's this really strong African-American culture, which was really cool for us to get to experience coming from Western Canada, where there isn't much of that. So yeah, just really cool experience living in a city where there's all of these different cultures kind of like intermingling and really doing it well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we both grew up in small towns, and I really like the small town community vibe, but something I really love about a big major city is how sort of international and multicultural it is, because you don't get that as much when you're in a small town. You get more of sort of the same types of people, I guess. Like thinking about Canmore specifically, you get really outdoorsy people, people who really like, hiking, biking, running, skiing, yoga, that sort of thing, which is really cool because we like those things. But then going to somewhere like Atlanta, you get people who have all different sorts of interests, all different types of people from all over the world with different backgrounds. And I feel like living somewhere like that, it just opens your eyes to sort of like a bigger world, I guess. Yeah, and it opens the options for you of things that you can do. Like I know towards the end of our stay, we were still finding things where I was like, oh wow, someone told us about this thing we can go do. We go for Ethiopian food. I'm like, whoa, this is
new area of the city is cool. Like, we've never even been over here before. It seems like there's like almost endless amount of options and things to do.
Yeah. And it's cool too, because we found an Ethiopian restaurant that we really liked. And then, I was talking to Katie about it, and she's like, oh, I actually really like this Ethiopian restaurant better than that one that you went to. And it's cool to be in a city where there's more than one cool, great Ethiopian restaurant. Like, Calgary had some choice and some culture, but just not to the extent of Atlanta. And so we're going to continue on with our next interview with a friend as to why they love living in Atlanta. All right, I've got Mike Mel with me. How long have you lived? Hi. How long have you lived in Atlanta for now?
I've been in Atlanta for 8 years.
Wow. And you like living here, obviously.
I absolutely love it. I know a lot of times wherever people live, it's like, they get worn out by it. But I can honestly say this is the city that I feel like is home.
Yeah, that's cool. And you grew up in Florida, right?
Yeah.
And so what is it about Atlanta that you like more than where you were living in Florida?
What I love about Atlanta is, first of all, this is a real metropolitan city. Mm-hmm. We may not have as many people as New York or LA or Chicago, but we're a top 10 food city. Our arts and culture is off the chain. You cannot go anywhere in Atlanta City proper and not see graffiti. Mm-hmm. We have an amazing art scene. There's a movie industry here. The parks are absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's everything you could possibly want out of living in city life.
Yeah, it's something that surprised me a lot when I came down here. Atlanta was not on my radar in any way, and I came down and I was like, oh, this is like a legit city. Like, it's like the biggest city in the South.
Yeah, well, Atlanta used to be called Terminus.
Okay.
This used to be the place where all the train lines converged and ended back in the day. So even now, we're still a hub.
Yeah.
So, any artist you can think of who's touring, mm-hmm. they're going to come through. Our biggest art museum has a partnership with one of the biggest art museums in the world. Mm-hmm. So we get in really high quality art. It's like we're an actual destination for things. Yeah, it's super cool. What are some of your favorite things to do in the city? Well, I do have to say eat. There's a very big foodie community here. A lot of locally sourced stuff, a lot of what people joke around and call artisanal. Mm-hmm. But the food is ridiculous. And I love going out in shows because I can see anything from Prince, who I got to see before he passed.
Super cool.
To local acts.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great venues. I love the nature too. Atlanta actually has a lot of green space built into it. So wherever you go, there's trees, there's park areas, and it's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's funny that you say green space because it's been a consistent thing with everyone that I've talked to for this episode, just saying that one of the things they love most about the city is how green it is. And I know for me, it was hugely shocking to come down here. I expected it to just be sort of concrete jungle, which it's not at all. There's so many trees here. There's so much greenery. There's so many trails.
Yeah, it's something that I think when they plan out the city and the growth of the city, it's something that's very important culturally here. Yeah. Because every project always includes it. And to me, it just makes it feel a lot more livable. Yeah,
I would agree with that. And if somebody's coming in to visit Atlanta and they only have a day or two or, a weekend, what are some things that you would recommend for them to do? Keep in mind that everyone's preferences are different, so just the things that you would do.
Sure. So if you like fine art, the High Museum is one of the finest art museums in the country. Mm-hmm. The Atlanta Symphony Orchestra has won Grammys. If you go out to Stone Mountain Park, mm-hmm. there's marvelous hiking out there. I hesitate to make a restaurant recommendation because that's up to you, but you are not going to have a problem finding premium food here. Anything from food trucks to 5-star locally sourced cuisine.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else that you would recommend in Atlanta? Anything else you love?
I would actually recommend that you check out Sister Louisa's Church of the Living Room and Ping Pong Emporium, which is one of the best bars in the United States.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good to know. I might have to check that out before I go.
That is my regular haunt.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Yeah, thank you. Y'all should come to Atlanta.
It's fun listening to Mike talk about Atlanta because now, recording this episode, we're currently sitting back in Canmore, Alberta. But it makes me excited and kind of like a little bit sad to not be in Atlanta because it makes me feel excited about the city. And in the last segment, I was talking about how towards the end of our stay, we found a couple things that we hadn't discovered before. And we're like, how do we not know this for like 9 months? We went for dinner at the Krog Street Market with Mike. And that was one of those places where you're like, what? This place is so cool. There's tons of beer options and then just a big food court comprised of like all these really cool, unique places.
It's like a fancy food court.
Yeah, like a really fancy, like hipster food court.
And it's kind of at the end of the Beltline Trail too, which makes it like you can walk sort of from Piedmont Park through to Pont City Market, continue on, and then you make it to the Krog Street Market. So that's like a super cool thing to do if you have an afternoon in Atlanta.
Yeah. And so Mike is into the art scene and the music scene in a way that we're really not.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's really cool to hear from people who have different interests from our own and to talk to them and hear what they like. Because, you know, the bar that he mentions, that's just like his regular haunt, as he says, is somewhere that I'd never even heard of before. So it's really cool to find out these little sort of like local places that people really like. And I actually never went to any of the art museums when I was there. So I think that that's something I'm going to add to my list when we visit Atlanta next. What about you?
Yeah, I think I only went to maybe, I think it's called MODA.
Museum of Design?
Something, I don't know. But they had a 3D printing exhibit. They kind of have like all this like more higher tech art. So that was the only one I really checked out. But yeah, I know there's quite a few really good museums, and there's the High Museum, and then I know on the Emory campus, Emory is one of the nicest universities, probably in the country, maybe if not in the world.
That's a bold statement, right?
It's a pretty spectacular place. Yeah, but they have quite a few really nice places to go visit on the campus as well. Yeah,
and it's really cool to hear Mike mention the movie scene as well, because it's something that I didn't know about.
Yeah. That was another one of those things we kind of found out right at the end.
Yeah, there was a yoga studio that I went to on the west side of Atlanta, and I remember the owner being like, oh, just so you know, like some of the cast from The Walking Dead comes in here because, you know, they kind of like live around this area. And I was like, say what? We're not in LA.
Yeah. And then also we went to a place called the Atlanta History Center, which was not too far from where we lived, just up more into Buckhead.
And like right beside the Whole Foods that we frequented like the entire time we were there.
Yeah. And they actually shot
Hunger Games.
Hunger Games there. President Snow's mansion is in there. So maybe 10-minute drive from our house or something like that.
Yeah. It's super cool because you've got sort of the duality of the older history. Like we lived right by Peachtree Creek, where the Battle of Peachtree Creek was fought back in the Civil War, which is a really interesting history. And then you've got this history center with this Swan house that's old and has really, really cool background to it as well. But then they've shot Hunger Games there, which is this whole like old meets new type thing where it's this older city with a lot of modern things in it. And yeah, it's this place where I guess you can see celebrities quite often. I know Katie told me early on when I met her that, you know, if you're at the hot food bar, at the Buckhead, Whole Foods, like keep your eyes open to celebrities. She's like, I've seen a couple there. I guess that I'm just always too hangry when I'm there, that I'm so focused. I never actually saw a celebrity, but definitely something to keep in mind if you're visiting Atlanta. There's the potential for the arts and culture scene and to maybe see a celebrity. And so we'll continue on with our next friend talking about why they love Atlanta.
All right, we've got James Walpole here with us, and he's going to talk about why he loves living in Atlanta.
Hey, World Wanderers. Really love the show. This is a great question because I was driving through Atlanta today. It's a Saturday. It's really bright, sunny during the summertime. And there's nothing like Atlanta in the summertime. It's brutally hot. However, it's a really vibrant city. I grew up on a farm. Moving here 2 years ago was a big change. And seeing just the variety of culture that's here. Everyone comes here from all over the world to work, to build their careers, and eventually to kind of build culture, build families. And there's a lot of culture here. There's a lot of art. I was listening to opera on the radio on the way here. I don't usually listen to opera, but I was feeling cultural,
Yeah.
And there's so many concert halls, so many theaters, so many college students. Passed by Piedmont Park. I mean, it's a very green city. So something else I really like about it. It's a big change from living on a farm, but there's also kind of there's a lot of greenage, a lot of trees, a lot of wildlife, and a lot of great hiking trails nearby. Which we World Wanderers have had a chance to explore a little bit while you've been down here. It's a beautiful place, and I really enjoy living here. Finally, kind of getting to the point where I feel like this might be a good place to live long term.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And so, on the weekends, what are some of your favorite activities to do in Atlanta?
I'm really kind of a walking, hiking person, so I really enjoy going and finding some natural spots nearby. And the really great thing about Atlanta is that, like I said, you can find some pretty wild areas kind of hidden, tucked away right in the middle of residential areas, of commercial areas, and just go walk and explore, and really enjoy music in the area as well. So I'm kind of finally kind of getting around to identifying the great music venues. One place I really like is in Decatur, which is right outside of town. It's called Eddie's Attic, and it's literally an attic. It's built right on top of a Waffle House. So if you know the South, Waffle House is also one of our great restaurant franchises. But it's a great place for acoustic music. I think John Mayer got his start there.
Oh, cool.
So you see a lot of great artists coming through. And so there's a couple of things I enjoy doing on the weekends, but still need to explore a lot of the area. I feel like I could live here for several more years and not see everything.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about it.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
always building.
Yeah, that's like the thing about only being down here for a short period of time. It's like there's been this push to kind of see as much as we can, and it's like just knowing that you're never going to be able to see it all because there's too much to see.
Yeah, there's some really cool, interesting stuff like Plaza Fiesta or like weird like cultural things that happen in different areas of the city.
Yeah, definitely. And so if somebody was coming down here for like a day or two, like a weekend sort of thing, what would you recommend that they do?
I would say go to Piedmont Park, go find a show at Eddie's Attic and go see it. As far as food, what would I recommend?
Chick-fil-A?
Chick-fil-A. Yeah, that's why I brought Ryan down here for when he was like first day or second day here in Atlanta. I'm like, you got to come to Chick-fil-A. It's not Atlanta specific or anything. It's not like a hole in the wall like 5-star restaurant. It's like the South's restaurant, fast food restaurant food chain, but definitely a great one. I'm not too much of a foodie, so I actually don't know what I recommend for that. But I would say just go walk around, get out of your car and walk around and expose yourself to the variety of life that's here. Expose yourself to some adventure because you'll find it here in Atlanta.
Cool. Thank you so much, James.
Thanks, guys.
I love how in James is talking, he talks about both Chick-fil-A and Waffle House. And something that's really funny is that I never went to Chick-fil-A and Ryan never went to Waffle House. But Ryan went to Chick-fil-A and I went to Waffle House. So we can both speak on one of them. And Waffle House was on Anthony Bourdain's show. He talked about the pecan waffle. I'm gluten-free, so I didn't have that, but I convinced my friends who came down when I took them to have it, had a little taste of it, and it's spectacular.
Yeah, and so just to back up a tiny bit, Waffle House is kind of like, for anyone who's not from like the Southeast, what is it like? It's like maybe like Denny's, but like a little bit.
It's like more diner style
yeah.
than Denny's. It's, I guess you can rent it out for weddings, which is like kind of cool.
But so
anyone wants to eat it or have their wedding at Waffle House.
When you're in the Southeast US and you're driving from like city to city, for example, we took a trip from Atlanta to Charleston. It seems like basically every exit has a Waffle House.
Yeah. So
like not even exaggerated. Like within 2 hours of Atlanta, it's like, oh, Waffle House. Like it's as if your car broke down in the middle of nowhere and you just like walked in any direction, you would stumble upon a Waffle House.
Yeah, definitely. I can't remember if we talked about this in the Mardi Gras episode that we recorded, but the girls who came down, I was like, okay, we're going to go to Waffle House when we head out for New Orleans on the Saturday morning. And So we're driving. I'm like, just let me know when you guys are starting to get hungry. And they're like, okay, we're ready to eat. And so we pass a Waffle House. And I was like, okay, no worries. I'll just stop at the next one. And my friend who's passengering immediately gets on my phone, and she's like using my data. She's like, I'll look up where the next one is. I was like, George, stop. It's already there. Like, it's right there. And she was like, oh, you weren't kidding when you said they were everywhere. Like, literally the next exit, like maybe 1.5 miles from the one.
Yeah. And it seems to be the thing that, like, even though Waffle Houses exist outside of the South, it's like people from the South love Waffle House. And people who aren't do not.
I mean, there's people from the South, though, that I've also heard talk about Waffle House in a very
You can't generalize
way.
like that, but it seems like a Waffle House has this position of like the late night place to go for drunk food in the South, and in the North, it's like, don't go to Waffle House. Yeah, definitely. And so Chick-fil-A is also, you don't really see like Kentucky Fried Chicken in Atlanta. I mean, I don't remember seeing any. Yeah, there are KFCs there. I think the thing is that KFCs like don't have sandwiches.
Yeah, they do.
There?
Yeah, they do.
Do they?
They've had sandwiches for years.
But like in Georgia. In the
I don't frequent KFC, so I'm not too sure.
I don't know. Apparently Chick-fil-A invented the chicken sandwich.
Okay. Do you want to tell our listeners about Chick-fil-A, since I never experienced it?
Well, it's another one of those things like people love some Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm uncertain of it.
So if somebody is wanting a really Southern experience, do you think that Chick-fil-A is a good place to go get some fried chicken from?
Chick-fil-A is really famous for the chicken sandwich, or for breakfast. There's these things, I think they're called chicken minis, which is on this little like dinner roll-esque thing with a tiny piece of fried chicken. Those were really good. I had those for breakfast one time. Yeah, Chick-fil-A is everywhere though. So that's the thing. I think in the South, like there are a lot better places to go check out to do.
Chick-fil-A is not all over the U.S., is it?
I think it is.
Okay.
There's even a couple in Canada, I believe.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think Ryan and I are not the biggest into the deep fried Southern food. It's not.
Yeah,
it's not really how we like to eat. But
so the Southern food that I think is more up my alley would be barbecue. There are a lot of really good places to go and get barbecue in Atlanta and Georgia.
Yeah, and kind of just in general, like Alabama, Mississippi.
Yeah, get some ribs, get some cornbread.
Yeah.
Some slaw.
Yeah. I mean, I've just gotten questions constantly since being home, and somebody asked me about the food, and I was saying how I actually really like kind of like the Louisianan style food a little bit better than sort of like the Georgian biscuits, fried chicken.
Biscuits, yeah.
Yeah. You like a good biscuit, hey?
Yeah.
I think this is a perfect segue, since our last guests that are coming on to talk about why they love Atlanta, one of them's from Louisiana. All right, I've got Richard Lawrence and Colin Calderera here, and Richard's a local of Atlanta, born and raised in Georgia, and Colin is originally from Louisiana and has been here for about a year, and they're going to tell me why they love living in Atlanta.
I think Colin has the most unique experience because he's only been here since August.
Well, yeah, so I've been here less than a year, but I've really liked it here so far. But where I'm coming from is outside of New Orleans, about 45 minutes southwest. And I mean, it's a wonderful small city where I'm from called Houma. And I mean, really enjoyed growing up there and everything. And then I lived in Baton Rouge when I was in school at LSU. And after graduate school, I moved here for a teaching job. And I mean, I think one of the things I really like about it is it's the first big city that I've lived in. So that's a really cool experience right there. And I'm getting to live in the actual city part of it, not outside of it.
Yeah, which is kind of rare because some people, they move to, like, quote-unquote Atlanta, and then you're like, oh, where do you live? And they're like, oh, Alpharetta, like, well, 45 minutes away.
When I was teaching in Gwinnett County, all of the teachers would ask me where I was living because where I was teaching was in, the small town, a good little distance outside of Atlanta, but I guess 45 minutes outside of Atlanta. and they would ask me, "Oh, where are you living?" And where I originally moved to was Decatur, which is, in the Atlanta city limits, and they would say, "Oh, you're ITP." And I'd say, I don't know what that means, or I have an infection or something. But no, and they would say, "Well, we're OTP, but you're ITP, in the perimeter, or inside the perimeter, OTP meaning outside of the perimeter."
It's kind of an Atlanta class thing. If you're OTP,
Yeah.
you're kind of If you're ITP, you're in the middle of everything, you're in the mix, and you're considered to be that much better than someone OTP. I don't know if...
I think it went either way for these guys, because they were just saying, "Oh, I wouldn't want to live in the city. It's too far of a commute." And rightfully so, where I was teaching was pretty far out there. But it was worth it to me to live inside the city. So being inside, 285, I think it was worth it just for the experience of getting to live in the city. And, of course, I'm going to reside here for...
Ever and ever.
As long as I plan to. I have no plans of moving, I should say that. I'm really enjoying it here.
So what's your favorite thing about living in Atlanta?
I think just because of where we live in Candler Park or in Lake Claire, we can walk to restaurants and we can walk to coffee shops and everything. Things aren't too far away. And, people complain about the traffic all the time. And before I moved here, everybody said, "Oh, traffic's horrible in Atlanta." And they're right. But at the same time, if you use an app like Waze, or you're smart about what time you go to places and you figure all that out, it hasn't been a problem for me at all. And this is me coming from, small city in Louisiana, and I'm living here, and I have very few complaints. So
cool, that's awesome. And what about you, Richard? Growing up here, you left for a little bit, you came back. What brought you back to Atlanta?
Well, my job brought me back, but being in Chicago for 7 years after having grown up here definitely gave me a different perspective on what it meant to be in a real city, because I lived in a place in Chicago that was totally walkable. Everywhere I went was either by foot or by taxi cab or train or bus, so I didn't even have a car. And when I moved back to Atlanta 3 years ago, I bought a car, my first car ever, and now I feel silly if I'm driving anywhere less than a mile away from the house.
Yeah.
So like what Colin was saying is we really like living in Lake Claire and Candler Park because there are restaurants nearby, there are museums, we go jogging to Emory University down the road. It's a nice scenic run, and we don't have to drive everywhere if we don't feel like it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's what it means to be in a real city, is that you have walkability, and not to mention the neighborhood we live in is pretty tight. Mm-hmm. All the neighbors know each other, and we were just doing yoga out in the driveway a few minutes ago with a bunch of the neighbors, and it was just a really, really good time.
Yeah,
it's a good community. And the other thing about a city like this, just like any other large city, is the power of Uber, mm-hmm. and being able to get from one place to another. And I've driven for Uber since I moved here. And talk about help me learn the city. I mean, I know the city so much better because of that. And through that, I got to meet a lot of locals. And I actually made friends through driving for Uber. And,
That's really cool.
Sometimes meet them for drinks. And so it's really funny that it worked out that way. But, yeah.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that you guys really enjoy doing, like, on the weekends?
On the weekends, I mean, like he was saying, we really like running in the Emory area, from our house through there, and it usually ends up being about 4 or 5 miles. So we like doing that, but also we'll go get brunch, and there's a ton of options for that. Before I met Richard, I know I was going out to different clubs and stuff like that, and so I think the Atlanta gay scene is another thing that's just very interesting. And I would view it, and I would just kind of watch in amazement at what was going on, because positives and negatives, of course. And the places I was going to were like Blake's and 10, where I met tons of really nice people and made friends through there. Just, going out and meeting people. But then the other side of it is it's interesting to watch people interact there, because teaching middle school was very similar to going out to Blake's and 10, because you see these cliques of people that all kind of look at you when you walk in, and then they turn back to their group. And
it's so interesting.
It's very, and I will say, the reputation of Blake's and 10, I've had great experiences there. I've always enjoyed going, but the reputation is, it's very pretentious and very uppity almost. But at the same time, I think you kind of have to put yourself out there, meet people, and you get past that. You're going to meet people like that everywhere, but
now you've got material for at least 2 or 3 books.
yeah, I plan on writing a book comparing middle schoolers to
Nice. I'll put that in the show notes when it's out.
Of course, then everybody's going to listen to this and go, that asshole.
The names have been changed.
Oh, that's right,
You
yeah.
have to protect the innocent.
It's not the real
Block
people.
A's and teen.
And what about you, Richard? What are your favorite things to do on the weekend here?
Well, so we just had a couple friends in from Hungary a couple weeks ago, and it's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, because it's like when you live somewhere, you don't do all the touristy things.
Totally, yeah.
That, you do when you have out-of-town visitors. And so we showed them all of our typical places that we like to eat, all the parks. We went to Little 5 Points. We didn't make it to Piedmont Park, but that would be a really great other place to go to. We went to the Georgia Aquarium. We went to the Human and Civil Rights Museum. We went to the World of CocaCola. They went to the MLK House and the National Historic Site there. We showed them all around Buckhead. They went shopping at Lenox Mall and Phipps Plaza. There's just so much to do.
Yeah.
And especially in the summertime, too, because we just kind of hit the whole festival season. And I was accustomed to festival season in Chicago, where all the different neighborhoods would have their own thing. They block off the streets and they just throw a big party over the weekend. And I never really did that when I lived here originally, because I was younger and I was in college. But now that I live in the city, I'm beginning to see the Candler Park Fest, the Inman Park Fest, the Jazz Fest, everything that Atlanta has. It's a real city. Again, it's not this backward place. It's a place that you could actually enjoy for cultural purposes, for relaxation, for educational purposes, and just to kind of live here. It's just such a great place.
And on top of that, though, I mean, he had friends from Hungary visit, and I had my parents visit this past weekend.
Yeah.
And there was so much going on, and my mom really wanted to do the shopping at Lenox Mall and Phipps Plaza and everything. So we did all that. We also got to go eat at some different restaurants, and then one place we went to with the Hungarians and my parents, 2 different occasions, we went to...
The Sundial.
The Sundial.
Yeah.
And that was really cool, just to see the whole city from up there. And I guess I'm still a little touristy myself, just because I'm still new here. But all of that is really exciting to me to get to see. And
It's a great view, but for people who are listening to try to figure out like the best food in the city, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
it's pricey, too.
It's pricey for what you get, but it's a great view because the Sundial is a restaurant that actually rotates.
Yeah, go grab a drink there. It's worth the upcharge of the price of drinks to get to go look over and see that.
Totally, yeah. I
That
took friends up there
beautiful
for a
city.
drink. Because it's still it's like $13 for a cocktail. Like,
Right,
it's still
right.
not cheap to get a drink. I looked at the menu and I was like, we'll eat elsewhere.
73 floors up, though, you get to see everything in the city.
Yeah. So if somebody was here for like one day and could only do a couple of things, what would be some top highlights for you guys? And I know obviously there's a million different things to do here and everyone does different things based on interests, but just based on what you guys like to do.
I guess it would depend on how far away they were coming from or how familiar they are with the city, because with Coca-Cola being like such a huge thing here, I mean, definitely visiting the Coca-Cola Museum would be cool, but it's also a very, tourist trap-ish thing to experience. I mean, that going into it. Also, I mean, a new thing that's around that, since I've been here and I just assumed, it's been here forever, but really it hasn't, is the Beltline. That's really cool to walk because you can access so many things on the route.
Yeah.
It's that Ladybird.
Yeah, Ladybird, the restaurant is right there. And then on the Beltline are both Krog Street Market and Ponce City Market.
Yes.
Which are rehabbed warehouses that now have restaurants and stalls in them that are really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And Atlanta, like a lot of other cities, has a nice sort of craft beer scene that's emerged over the past few years. A lot of pubs.
That's something my dad was huge into when we came here too, and he was a big fan of the Monday Night Brewery.
Yeah, it seems to be popular.
Yeah.
I would say the other thing that really struck our friends from Hungary, and I think even strikes me a little bit when I think about my time in Chicago, is just how green Atlanta is.
Totally.
There are trees everywhere. Like, you cannot... I'm just looking outside right now. We're sitting on the patio and we're hearing the birds, and there's just trees everywhere. And when you take off from the airport, you see just how green the city is. And you realize it from the street level, too, there's not a place in this city where there are not trees, and it just makes it feel that much better.
It's kind of like Seattle without the rain, or as much rain.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It's I continuously find it surprising how green it is for such a big city.
And coming from South Louisiana, it's significantly cooler to me, even though everybody is saying, oh, the summer's really hot and everything, and it is. And they have the humidity too, but I still don't think it's nearly as intense as it is in South Louisiana. And I love South Louisiana.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely nicer here. My parents came to visit, and I was saying, oh, it's a little muggy, it's a little hot today. And they said, are you kidding me? Because June in, New Orleans, around that area, it's just, you stay inside in those afternoon hours because it's pretty hot out there.
Yeah.
If not raining.
But there are a lot of really other cool places to go, even outside of the city. My parents live in Roswell, and we just took Colin's parents up there this past weekend to go look at the ruins of the old mill there and the waterfall. It's just awesome natural scenes. There's Kennesaw Mountain, there's Red Top Mountain, there's Stone Mountain.
Yeah, there's so much hiking around here.
A lot of natural scenes.
Yeah.
And then you come back in and you can walk down a corridor in Phipps Plaza and buy Armani and Prada.
Yeah.
One place I haven't been to either is the Six Flags over Georgia, which is to the left of Atlanta.
Yeah, to the west.
And so I need to make it there too.
We'll go for Fright Fest.
That's right.
We went for Fright Fest.
I have a good friend who went there for Fright Fest, and he absolutely loved it.
You should dress up as Marty McFly again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you.
Come to Atlanta.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny because right after I finished recording with Colin and Richard, I was like, oh, you haven't been to Six Flags Over Georgia? Ryan and I are actually going this weekend, which is the weekend coming up just a couple days after I interviewed them. And so we ended up going to Six Flags together, and we just had an amazing time. I'm sure just from listening to that excerpt, you can tell that Colin and Richard are really hilarious, super cool people. And, just re-listening to this for the podcast is really making us miss all of our friends in Atlanta in general, but just smiling at everything that they had to say and thinking about Six Flags Over Georgia and the fun day that we had there. What did you think of Six Flags? Because we went.
We actually went twice to Six Flags. We went to Fright Fest, which was it was like, I don't know, we were there like 8 p.m. or something like that in October. And they've got like fog machines everywhere, people dressed up trying to harass you.
Like zombies.
Yeah. And then it was pretty busy. So at an amusement park, if you have to wait in line for like 45 minutes, it's not as enjoyable. So then when we returned towards the end of our stay in June.
Yeah, the lines were a little
actually
bit
the last
shorter.
day before we left. Lines were actually really short. It was a hot day. Not many people out at Six Flags. So we were actually like roller coaster and roller coaster and roller coaster,
yeah.
which was fun, but like we might have gotten like a little too much. And it was actually, it's funny because you kind of imagine it being one of these things like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was no lines at any of the roller coasters? But it's actually like you kind of need some of those lines to
like chill out a little bit.
Take a break, yeah. And it was funny because towards the end of the day, we all hopped on this wooden roller coaster. And I was imagining it being like, oh, this looks like kind of quaint. It'll probably be like a little slower, a little more chill, smooth wooden roller coaster.
It was atrocious.
Yeah, I'd never been on a wooden roller coaster before. It was just crazy.
Don't go on the All-American Scream Machine if you go
never
to
go
Six
on
Flags
that
Over
wooden
Georgia.
Just like shaking around. I think we all got whiplash.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that they brought up the Georgia Aquarium and the World of CocaCola, because those are two of
Did they bring up the aquarium?
Yep. Yeah, they took the Hungarians there. That happened.
I don't know.
But so the Georgia Aquarium is actually, I think, the biggest aquarium in the United States.
It says it's the #1 aquarium in the United States.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's got a massive, massive tank in there with a bunch of different sea life, whales, sharks, manta rays, that sort of thing.
Goldfish.
I don't know if there's goldfish in there. It's really impressive.
Plankton.
Though. Yeah, and then we went
Amoeba.
just stop. We went to the world of Coca-Cola just a couple weeks before we left Atlanta, and I don't really like pop that much, so I don't really know why I wanted to go there, but I actually had a lot of fun. It's probably my favorite tourist attraction in Atlanta.
Yeah. And so the kind of like main feature of the world of Coca-Cola, at least for us, was this room where you can try all of the different
Coke products from around the world.
Yeah. And it's funny because before going there, someone was like, oh, there's this room where you can try all the Cokes from around the world. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, because Coke formulas are different in each different country, I was like, okay, so it'll be like Mexican Coke, Peruvian Coke, Thailand Coke, China Coke, US Coke. So we go there, we get there, and we're like, but there's only the one flavor of Coke. The rest are all these other pops. Well, because it turns out people in the South call all pop Coke.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a thing.
So I was like, oh, this. So anyways, you can try all the different sodas, pops, Cokes from around the world.
Yeah.
Which was fun because there was actually quite a few that we remembered from Asia and from South America.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Fanta was a Coke product. And I mean, Southeast Asia was so hot and humid when we were there. And I don't know, it's like the one time
we were like 21, so we feel like we had different health habits.
I never really drank pop even back then, but I've never really enjoyed pop that much. I don't know, it makes me feel weird. Probably all the sugar and bubbles and stuff. But I remember really like craving Fanta. I think it's because we could actually get it cold, and it stayed cold a little bit longer than water would when we were in Asia. Yeah, trying these flavors and being like, oh yeah, this takes me back to like being in Vietnam, and then, you know, trying all the ones that were in Africa where we haven't really traveled, and tasting these, I don't know, some really bad and some really good different types of Coke products, and just seeing how like massive of a company it is and how, you know, brilliant their marketing is and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and learning about the history is interesting. And so the reason the world of Coca-Cola is in Atlanta is because Coca-Cola started in Atlanta, still based in Atlanta. So yeah, it's really interesting to check out. And I feel like it's a good mix of like entertainment for maybe younger people or people who aren't particularly interested in history, but then there's also the history side of it or the marketing side of it. So you can kind of engage yourself intellectually or just kind of, I don't know, lightheartedly, emotionally. I don't know.
Yeah. Something I really liked about it too is that you could actually go into this sort of like moving room, like you moved with it, and you could see like the process of Coke actually getting bottled.
Yeah, they had a full bottling line happening, and then you would get a free Coke at the end as well as at the start.
Yeah, which is actually from the bottling line, which is really cool.
Yeah, and so if you are going to go to the world of Coke, I'd suggest doing it before like a nap or like towards the end of your day, not the first thing you're going to do.
Yeah, because you get a pretty big
Massive
sugar crash. What are some of the other things that you really loved about Atlanta? I know that Colin and Richard talked about Piedmont Park, which is somewhere that you actually took me there on my first day, and it's like a massive park right with a view of, you know, downtown, spectacular green space. We hung out there a couple times. I wish we'd gone there more, actually.
Yeah, Piedmont is probably like the feature park of Atlanta. It's like the central park of Atlanta. Really big green space right in kind of the heart of the city, and you get, because it's so close to downtown, you get these really spectacular views from in the park where you're looking over this green space. There's a couple of views of the lake and this like really beautiful skyline in the background. Mm-hmm. There's always a lot of people out and about there playing sports, walking around. So Piedmont is a fantastic place to go spend an afternoon and take some photos. And another thing that Colin brought up was Uber. And I think for Atlanta, Uber and Lyft are just working spectacularly well there. And I think that like because they exist there, it kind of like fundamentally changes the experience of the city.
Yeah, the city grew a lot more than they ever planned for it to grow. So MARTA, which is the transit system, is actually not very good. It doesn't get you to a lot of different places in the city. And so the traffic is horrendous because the majority of people drive. And that is a true statement. And even since being back, there's a girl who I work with in Banff, and she's like, oh, I hated Atlanta because of the traffic. And I was like, you know, the traffic is atrocious there. There's no getting around that. Rush hour, it's really, really bad. But, you know, if you can kind of get over the city, over the traffic, the city is amazing.
Yeah, and when I moved down there, I didn't have a car, so I would just Uber around everywhere. And it's remarkably affordable, especially if you're riding with a friend. Like, it's cheaper than public transit, but it's like you press a button, it's there in 4 minutes. You go wherever you need to go. You're sitting, you're not driving, worrying about traffic or anything like that. And it's amazingly cheap.
Yeah.
So
it's one of the things that I miss the most about like being in the U.S.
Yeah, moving to a city that doesn't have Uber or Lyft or ride sharing after living there, it's like, what are we doing? Are we in, this is like 2006 here. Like, it's just like such
Stone Age.
It's like, it is like a really important feature of like a modern city is allowing ride sharing to really improve people's lives, and it does.
Yeah, definitely. And something that was brought up in a couple of the interviews that we haven't really touched too much about is Ponce City Market. And Ponce City Market is quite central. It's between sort of Midtown and Little Five Points. And it's the old Sears warehouse. And they've basically converted it into shops and restaurants and this really cool space.
So on the main floor and the ground floor, it's kind of like shops and restaurants. And then above that, all offices.
Yeah. Yeah, there's even apartments there too. There's people live in Ponce City Market.
Really?
Yeah.
But I think so. A lot of the tech companies in Atlanta are based there. I think Twitter has an office there. Google has an office there. MailChimp is based there. How Stuff Works, the podcasting company, is based in Ponce City. A ton of really cool places right there.
Yeah, and it's just this really like trendy hipster spot to kind of go to. You can go, you do a little bit of shopping. It's more higher end shops, but you can just like kind of check it out. Maybe get like bite to eat, a drink, or a popsicle, and then you can walk on the Beltline and get either to Piedmont Park going north, or if you go south, you get right to Krog Street Market. And there's graffiti along the entire route of the Beltline, which is something that I really, really loved.
Yeah, and I think that something I would do if I was going to Atlanta for a weekend, I think an amazing thing to do would be start out, maybe if you get started at like 10 a.m. or something like that, go grab a coffee somewhere near Piedmont Park, or even in Piedmont Park, there's a few coffee carts. Kind of walk around Piedmont, head down the Beltline to Ponce City, and then you stop there, and there's some amazing options for lunch at Ponce City, and then you can kind of continue on the Beltline that way.
Yeah, definitely. And so just one last thing that we wanted to touch on that nobody mentioned, but that we did, was the Margaret Mitchell House. And I had seen Gone with the Wind when I was younger. It's, one of my mom's favorite movies. So I was introduced to it. But then being down in the South, I read the book and rewatched the movie. Kind of became a little bit obsessed with the entire like Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler love story. And so going to the Margaret Mitchell House was really cool. They've kind of bought the entire area.
And so what is the Margaret Mitchell House?
So it used to be an apartment complex, and she used to have an apartment there. And now they've bought the entire building and converted most of it into a museum, and then decorated the old apartment where she used to live and where she wrote Gone with the Wind. And so really cool gift shop, really neat museum, kind of talking about her life. And then you can just go see where the magic was created.
Where the magic happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually, so we mentioned before the Atlanta History Center. If you go up to the Atlanta History Center, or you go to the Margaret Mitchell House, the ticket works for both. And there's a really good Civil War museum at the Atlanta History Center, as well as just a beautiful grounds to walk around at. So yeah, you can do that. I know you went to the MLK Museum in Atlanta as well. What was that like?
That was really interesting. I just didn't know anything about, the Civil War and then like the freedom movement for African Americans. I just feel like I was very separated from that, being, born and raised in Western Canada. And so you go to the museum and you kind of learn about what it was like for African Americans in the 50s and the 60s, and how, even though they had these quote unquote rights from after the Civil War, they really didn't have a lot of rights. There was a lot of segregation and like inequality. And then it just talks about sort of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and his fight for freedom, how he ended up getting killed, and just sort of that entire piece of history. And the reason why it's in Atlanta is because he was actually born there, and then he's actually buried there with his wife as well. So right by the museum, there's a street of houses that's called like the MLK birth area, and you can go see the house where he was born in. And then you walk a little bit further, just down from the museum, and then there's this beautiful sort of waterfall type thing that's going down in a few layers, and him and his wife's tombs are there. So it's like a really, really neat area to visit. I think that it's a really important piece of history to learn about, especially if you're not from the South and you don't realize what it was sort of like in the 60s.
Yeah, and I think being Canadian, we don't learn that much about American history, so you do. I think from like someone from the northern U.S. probably knows a lot more about it than us as Canadians.
Yeah, definitely. I think though, even if you're from the northern U.S., maybe you just don't have like a real comprehension of what things were like in the South, or maybe you have a different idea based on what you were taught in school as to what it's like. And I think it's really interesting to learn about MLK and see, you know, how much hatred there was and how much of a struggle there was for peace and equality. And I think it's just a really interesting place for me to go. And I didn't get to go to the Human Rights Museum, which was actually really new right before we left. So I think that that would definitely be something that I would add to my list for the next time we're in Atlanta, just to learn a little bit more about the history down in the South, because it's just, yeah, there's a lot of history down there.
Yeah.
And so any final thoughts, feelings, words on Atlanta?
Just that it's a truly world-class city, and we both really enjoyed living there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that almost everyone that we interviewed said, you know, it's a real city, and it really is a real city. It's 6.4 million people. There's a ton of things to do. We'll put all the things that were mentioned in this episode by ourselves as well as our friends in the show notes, so you can check those out. And then just a big thank you to Katie, Mike, James, Colin, and Richard for being a part of this episode. It's amazing to have people who have also lived in Atlanta and who've lived in Atlanta much longer than ourselves to talk about the things that they love doing and why they love living there.
Yeah, and we'll have links to everything in the show notes.
And just a quick reminder, if you've been wanting to learn a language or struggling to learn a language, definitely check out Italki. It's honestly been something that Ryan and I have found to be very helpful for us to learn a language. And we do have the promo going on. If you buy your first lesson, you'll get your second lesson free with us. And that'll be theworldwanders.com/Italki, Italki. Thanks for listening.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanders.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.